sit. Hope and pray someone will come along and show the way. He's an inspiration, he's an inspiration, he's an inspiration to us now. He's an inspiration, he's an inspiration, he's an inspiration to us now. When all else has been done and said, along comes Mr. Oyster Head. When all else has been done and said, you best look out for Mr. Oyster Head. Along comes Mr. Oyster Head. When all else has been done and said, along comes Mr. Oyster Head. When all else has been done and said, along comes Mr. Oyster Head. When all else has been done and said, along comes Mr. Oyster Head. When all else has been done and said, you best look out for Mr. Oyster Head.
You a farmer?
Welcome to Buzz Talk Live. Oysters, part of the life's work of my guest tonight. In his 10-year anniversary, Chuck Westfall is one of the pioneers in the revival of the Blue Point oysters on Long Island and is also an environmentalist for the Great South Bay. President of Thatch Island Oyster Farm and Richie Spagnola, past partner of the business, are here tonight to basically give us their view on how they work in their oyster farm that's a stone's throw from Fire Island Inlet. Chuck and Richie work the oyster farm and produce one of the finest oysters on Long Island, called Fire Island Blues, raised on the sandy bottom, adding mineral tones and flavor unique to its location. Not overly sweet or salty, great for enjoying raw with that briny finish of the Atlantic. So let's chat to two of Long Island's oyster farmers from Thatch Island Oysters, Chuck and Richie. Gentlemen, welcome to Buzz Talk Live.
Hey, George, how are you?
Hey, how you doing, guys?
Good.
All right. Well, welcome to the show. I'm glad you guys...
Let me start right here with a correction.
Uh-oh.
They're not one of the finest oysters on Long Island. They're one of the finest oysters in the world.
Oh, okay. All right. I like that better. All right. Should I redo that, Chuck?
Yeah, retake this.
From the top. Let's go.
Yeah, well, it's a live show. So, hey, guys, really, seriously, thank you for joining me tonight. We got a lot to cover. You guys are in an interesting business all to itself. Oysters, and it's on every plate that you order appetizer in a restaurant, and I love oysters, and I'm sure viewers out there do too, and there's all different ways of having oysters, and there's all different types of oysters, but your business, you've been in it now for like 10 years. You took over the business, Chuck, but before you did that, you were in audio production. So let's touch on the audio side first, and let's feather into how you got into the oyster business.
Yeah, I don't know that you can feather into it because it was an abrupt change. But yeah, I ran an audio company. I did live sound reinforcement, some music work. I used to have the contract for the Central Park Summer Stage. Did that for several years. And George, I used to do a lot of
Yeah,
events in and around New York. We worked together back in the day.
sure.
Um, but I was getting long in the tooth. I'd been doing it for a long, long time.
Mhm.
And probably the impetus for me to finally retire out of that business was 9/11, because the our business,
Right,
Richie's,
right.
mine, yours, George, sort of, well, it didn't collapse. It certainly felt that way. And
Yeah, yeah.
I took that opportunity to downsize. And I sort of worked for almost on and off for another 10 years. I basically only worked for customers who were either too stupid or too lazy to find somebody else.
Mhm. Well, that's good though. It's a good angle, I guess.
Yeah, no,
It's a good angle.
I didn't
Uh,
know better.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and then, I grew up on Long Island. I grew up on the Great South Bay. Uh, I had been interested in the ecology of oysters and how they were restoring a lot of the uh, habitat
Hmm.
that is necessary to further restore our estuaries and bays. And oyster farming is a great first step in actually bringing back, an environment that some of us knew as children when
Yeah,
I was a
yeah.
kid sailing on the Great South Bay. That environment is, greatly lost.
How
But this,
is it? How is it greatly lost though? Over the years, like I felt like back in the '70s, everything was great. We had the blackouts, we had the snowstorms, but for the most part, you can drink the water. You can, what it was it erosion? Was it what happened? What happened to the bay that, or in general, the waterways?
well, it's not a singular event. It's a accumulation of events over time. And what happens is various species get placed under greater and greater stress,
Hmm.
and you reach a crucial point, and at some point that species can collapse. And so it's sort of where, you get to that critical point. It's
Right,
like breaking through the ice, and bing,
right,
all of a sudden everything changes. And uh, that's what happened to the Great South Bay. At present, I would say the biggest problem that the Great South Bay and the other southern bays on Long Island have is we have a policy, a state and federal policy, to close up any overbreaches or inlets that would naturally happen.
right, right,
So
right.
they are out there spending billions of dollars keeping them from happen. And even if they do happen, they very quickly patch them back up. That's
Well,
probably the biggest problem.
pollution plays a role in it. I mean, a big role in it, I would think.
Well, you'd be surprised. We don't have a lot of point source pollution along the line. Never really did. We certainly have those problems that we've all heard about, the Grumman plumes and so forth, but that
Yeah,
hasn't worked its way to the bay.
that's my neighborhood.
That's your neighborhood. We're gonna come over and get a big
I'm
glass of
I'm
water.
glowing, ain't I? Glowing at you, Chuck.
Yeah, exactly.
Nah, look, I'll
Um,
tell you, and just to touch on that a little bit, I every time and I told this story actually last night, that every time my water guy comes over and checks my meter and tests the water, I always have this conversation with him, because I'm literally, I can throw a hardball to Grumman, and so as far as the plume and how it's, he's telling me that it's all the way down past Merrick Road and past in that area, and he says, it's safe to drink the water. So I don't know how true. I mean, I do drink it. I have filtered and all that, but getting back to your business, so you've since then got out of the audio production business that you ran, that you had a company with employees and everything. And so now, how did you get into oyster farm? Was it somebody that you met, or did you educate yourself?
Yeah, I
On
basically educated myself. I was doing a lot of reading, and like I said, grew up sailing on the bay and so forth.
right.
And as I was reading these articles of what oyster farming could do, I began to search for the possibility to find a plot of land or submerged land that I could start an oyster farm on.
Yeah. And that was back in 2010.
Yeah, I think it was 2010. I probably started the search about
Right.
2009, but yeah, around then, because it was a long, arduous thing. The regulatory issues, acquiring the land.
Sure.
I mean, it was probably almost 3.5 to 4 years before I was able to put one oyster in the bay.
Now, Richie, I want to bring you in here now. As far as how you got involved with Chuck, were you working for him in audio, and then you just happened to have an oyster conversation with him one day, or?
Yes. Well, I mean, as Chuck was making his exit from the audio industry, I mean, we had worked together many years before that, and he knew, how I worked. He thought I'd be a good fit to help him start this farm up.
Right.
And get out there and make things happen. And we live relatively close to each other as well.
Oh,
so
wow. Okay. I didn't know that.
So, yeah. So, and I was up for the adventure. I like being outdoors and stuff. And
but did you have any past experience with even fishing, or being?
Yeah, a lot like Chuck. I grew up on the water in Freeport, actually.
Okay.
And I would spend my whole summers just fishing, boating, and that kind of thing. And that was part of my childhood and all the way up to my adulthood. Being on the water wasn't.
Yeah, no, I mean Long Island boys. That's what they do, right? They they go fishing and they enjoy it because that's what's around us. Really, we're surrounded by water. So Chuck, then how did you happen along this plot of land? You have 5 acres. That's knee deep water that you manage and yield the oysters out of.
Yeah, I actually have 2 plots. One is 5.5 acres, and the other is 2.5 acres. They're leased from the town of Islip. So nearly all oyster farming is leased from some town or county or state agency.
Right.
There is some small amount of private land around Long Island. Actually, some of it goes back to pre-revolutionary patents that are still valid and valuable. So there are out in Peconic. There's a few or several. I'm not exactly sure how.
I have this really cool drone footage of the area that I want to roll, and we can speak over it. And I want you to describe as we're doing a flyover of the area, where this drone started from, and it's entering now into the water. What part of the area is this that it's flying over? Do you know?
Well, you just lifted off the eastern edge of Captree State Park. That's our dock there that almost looks like a boat in the middle of the water. That's our dock, and then the farm is just that water or cove just north of it. The island that you're seeing is called Havemeyer Island.
Okay.
In summer, it's also known as Have Another Island.
Have another island.
With some very colorful individuals that inhabit that island as well.
How so? What, gypsies or carnival people?
Well,
there's a lot of carnival people out in Suffolk,
Well, these are 3 old fishing companies, or what the remnants of it. And before the bridge was built, the fishermen would live on these islands in basically shacks for the week, and then only go home for the weekends. And that was, of course, before the bridge, which you're now just beginning to see in the background. Right, and you can see little bits of my farm there down below in the water, kind of peeking up. And this is back in the day. It was cold. Richie can attest to the cold. And we go out in the winter. We do this 12 months out of the year.
Wow.
And
wow,
so,
it must be really cold out there in the winter. I mean, I can imagine being knee deep in water and doing what you guys do.
What do you think, Rich?
I think Chuck and I have evolved with some coping mechanisms just to get through it.
Is that right?
Yeah, and I mean, in the dead of winter, especially with ice flows and things like that, we really have to be out there and check our gear and make sure things aren't
sure
floating away
so this is incredible footage. This is great footage that I found, and you're that far from Fire Island. You're pretty close.
Yeah, if you spun the camera around, you'd see Fire Island pretty close.
Right. That's really cool. Wow. So we go into, you have your setup there. Do you get these, as far as the oysters and how they're, what's the word? Is it called yielding, or it grows? You put seedlings in. You have to get that right. What's the process, Chuck?
Well, basically, in the late spring, we get what we call seed, because you use it just like you would a plant seed, and it's extremely small. I usually get it about 2 millimeters, which is about the size of the head of a pin.
Wow.
And then they grow up to be 3.5 to 4 inches is a market size oyster. So that's a multiplication factor of I don't know what, but probably 100 or more.
Wow.
So what happens is you have them in these grow bags, you can see right there, and you're constantly having to rethin the bags. In other words, empty them out and restock them. So one bag becomes 2 bags, 2 bags becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, 8 becomes 16, and so forth and so forth. And
did you together? Did you develop like a different method? I mean, I heard over the years. I remember you had my ear on a show once. You were saying, "Oh, I have a French method." I don't know what that. I mean, what is the method?
George,
Come on, you're a pioneer, Chuck.
George, I was not referring to growing my oysters when I told you I used the French method.
I must have walked into the conversation and I heard oysters and French, and then I combined the two.
No, we weren't talking oysters. Actually, Richie can tell you about that because it's right behind him.
Yeah. This was an intertidal method that we tried to establish.
Richie, turn around and look at.
Well, this was a system Chuck and I tried to develop where the oysters for a couple hours a day would be high and dry out of the water. And what that would do is it would stop barnacles and mussels and algae and everything else from setting on the oysters, producing a cleaner oyster. But what that would also serve to do is, as the tide would go down, and these oysters know it, they would take larger gulps of water. And with that, it develops the muscle and the meat inside the oysters a lot better. So as these oysters know that this water is going away, they would take larger gulps and then eventually be high and dry out of the water for a couple hours until the tide came back.
They're smart little whippersnappers, those guys, huh?
They are. And with that method, the goal was to produce meatier oysters that were also cleaner, that took less work and less effort to keep them being a clean oyster that you would want on your plate, basically, and not barnacle ridden.
The great part about this show is the chats, and people have been chatting in on all the social medias, Twitch, it looks like Facebook, and so I'm going to put up some chats here, and as far as it's pretty robust here with the chats. You got a fan out there of Salicito. Hi, Richie. And they want to know, winter oysters tastier than summer ones? How often do you harvest? Then I have some Facebook ones I'll get to. Can you speak to those?
Yeah. It's an interesting question. Are winter oysters tastier than summer ones?
Yeah.
And the answer to that is kind of yes, kind of no. And here's why. Oysters do kind of come into their season, and they're coming into their season right now. So oysters are in their season now, and they will be tasty all the way up through, September, October, November, December, January, all through winter. So
Really?
yes, the answer to that is right. And why that is because we're in a northern climate. So the oysters are fattening themselves up, sweetening themselves up with glycerins because they know they have to survive a winter. So the answer is yes. But that's not true for a southern oyster. And we northern growers will point out that southern oysters always taste bad.
Yes, I've had that experience numerous times.
They don't have to fatten up.
Right.
However, what we've done, or not we, but what people in the industry have done, I plant about maybe 20% triploid oysters, and that's an oyster that basically will not spawn. The reason that oysters get kind of bad tasting in the summer for a very short time because they spawn very quickly over a course of a week or two. And that's probably when you don't want to eat an oyster, when it's spawning. But I and most other oyster farmers will put a certain percentage of our oyster crop into triploid oysters, which actually don't spawn.
Oh,
and
interesting.
So they don't have that problem.
Yeah.
So yeah, traditionally they taste better in as they're approaching the cold months and in the cold months, but with a little bit of technology, that's really not so much true anymore.
We have some other chats from Facebook, and I have Brian Lee saying, "Good to see you, Richie." James Lorenz is saying, "Do you believe that oysters act as an aphrodisiac?" Well, Chuck, Richie.
No comment.
Come on, you guys must have like dozens of oysters a day. Something's got to be. I
can attest to this. Richie's wife has asked me to not feed him any more oysters. You specifically asked me to keep him off the oysters.
Oh my God!
You do the math. I don't know.
I never thought an oyster show can go to the late show.
Yeah.
We're gonna really take that left hard, aren't we?
He's a randy little bastard.
No, but hey, good question, James. Joe Pergolotti, my backyard. How much damage is caused by the brown tide? He's asking.
Brown tide doesn't harm oysters, but it's not a good food source for them. So what happens is we lose growth. So in the summer months, we're very anxious to get growth. It's a crop, right? And you need growth. So if we get hit by brown tide to any significant amount, then what we will see is just a slowdown of growth. And then when the brown tide is gone or dissipates, growth will pick back up. Brown tide, however, is pretty deadly to clams. And with that, I'm going to get up for a minute and let the damn cat out.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah. This is
and to say one more thing about the brown tide, George.
Yeah.
When we have the slow growth like that, we wind up keeping more of our oysters on the field instead of getting them out to market. So it slows production, and it's kind of a drag on the whole process. I mean, we wind up holding the oysters out on the farm for, the cycle's usually 11 months to market size, and then it winds up turning into 15.
Joe is chatting in. He's saying stop fertilize on Montauk Highway.
Well, thank you, Joe.
Fertilizes south of Montauk Highway.
No, well, he's absolutely right. Quite frankly, my biggest, people really, especially people on Long Island, if you really want to, shut up and actually put up, you really want to do something, stop fertilizing your lawn.
Yeah.
Okay. Understand that dandelions and clover are good things, not bad things.
I can't stand
These
both.
lawns are killing us. Get rid of your lawns, plant a garden, stop the fertilizing. And it's not just south of Montauk, because it's getting into your water supply that your kids are drinking.
Yeah.
And you're putting poisons on your lawn. You're putting fertilizer in your lawn. Your excessive nitrogen blooms are caused by this. These lawns are poisoned.
Wow.
And, that's the single thing that a homeowner could just simply do is look at his lawn and say, oh, yeah, that's deadly. That's doing us all harm. And I have Richie will tell me, I have a beautiful garden on a half-acre plot here.
Yeah.
And I haven't put a drop of fertilizer on my lawn for
really
30 years.
Wow.
And it doesn't show. It looks just fine.
I'm never going to look at my lawn again. I mean, that's like.
Yeah, quite frankly.
Matter of fact, I just fired my lawn guy. That's it. He's done.
Well, there's another funny thing is I always find it funny that people will hire a lawn guy and then go to the gym to work out.
Yeah, I love that. That's so true, though. It's so true.
But that's really fertilizer. Just get rid of it. Get rid of the broadleaf killer, all that stuff that kills stuff. Just don't do it.
Just a couple more chats here. Richie, do you bring oysters when it's your turn to cook at the firehouse? We didn't get to you as far as what you do when you're not oystering, but you've part-time
I have in the past, they're gone. They're gone like hotcakes. The guys love them. I mean, and there's so many ways you could prepare them.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. So I'm going to put up a map here, and it basically shows the oysters from all around our island and the type of oysters. I've never knew a map like this existed. I guess in your world, it's a pretty important map from where they're from, different types. I mean, what's this about, Chuck?
Well, yeah, there's oysters, as you can see in the Great South Bay, out in Mauritius, Shinnecock, Peconic, and up in the North Shore in the Sound.
Yeah.
10 years ago, I would say there would have been maybe 5 oyster farms. So this is all relatively new.
Right.
Oyster farms opening up all over the place. And oysters are grown differently. In deep water, you have a total different cultivation method than Richie and I have used here in the shallow water.
So there are different types I mean, I don't even call it a method. It would be shallow versus deep water oysters, different taste to them. Is that all reflective to the area?
Yeah, you probably could break down 3 distinct methods. One where the oyster is either on the bottom or very close to the bottom. You saw those bags that we had them in.
Right.
Richie and I would just lay those bags on the bottom, string them up with a long length of line, which we would have as a trawl line. They would be anchored, but basically the oysters are laying on the bottom. They're in the mud or on the mud.
Oh, okay.
Then you can move on to cage culture, which is basically a cage in which you might slide those bags into layers, almost like condominiums of oysters. So there might be, say, 6 or 8 of those bags into a cage.
I see.
And that cage would be dropped to the bottom, but the oysters would not interface with the bottom itself. They would be essentially suspended in the water. Then there's
go ahead.
There's a third, which is a floating method, and they take basically the bags again that you saw and attach floats to them. They can float to the surface, and then you string them up on lines, and that would be a surface grown method. So there's 3 basic methods that you might choose for various reasons, having to do with what the bottom is like.
Right.
Is there a lot of windage? Is there a lot of flow? What is your depth? So you have to adjust to the reality of your site.
But I've got to say that Chuck and I, over the years, have really had to change up our methods and our hardware and our rigging just to deal with the elements and with what Mother Nature deals out.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it was really tough going. And Chuck and I would go on what we would call treasure hunts.
Really?
Where, our gear breaks away and we find it floating out of, Fire Island Inlet, and we'd have to go chasing it.
Oh my God.
And, but, upon doing that, we'd find, all the other oyster farmers that were to the east of us, we'd find their stuff out there as well.
Is that right?
Yeah. And, you really got to,
for the most part, the bottom where the oysters rest and grow and do their business, is it flat? There's dips and valleys? Is it like one level that you're working in?
Well, it's mostly flat. It varies, but varies gently. I think one end of my field is probably about 8 feet deep, and it goes to another end of the field that's, 1.5 feet to 2 feet deep.
Oh,
it's a gentle slope between those
two
extremes. I
want to get to the process that you guys do here. So now I'm showing the slide here that what is this machine called that on the right and on the left that Richie is working with?
Yeah, there's Richie.
It's a basic tumbler. We would put the oysters into this tumbler.
Is that the technical name for that?
Tumbler sorter. It does 2 things. It tumbles and sorts. Yeah.
Wow. So it sorts it by size, or is it by weight? How does that work?
We can see there's basically holes there, and
right.
The tumbler has 2 sections of holes, and the holes are different sizes. So the oysters, will drop through the hole. And then there's a catch bin below it. So you get, when you throw a bunch of oysters down there, they tumble and sort to 3 different sizes.
Interesting.
And that can help you in that now when we replant them, because they'll go out for more growth, I can now sort them into size bags. So at some point we want to sell these things. So now that they've been sorted into size bags, I can know where my market size oysters are likely to be on my field and go straight there.
Well, there's another advantage to tumbling them like that.
Right.
In that it breaks off the feathery edge of the shell. And what that does is when we send it back into the water for more growth, it'll grow to be a more plump oyster. The shells will cup.
Oh, okay.
Which is it makes a nice meaty, pretty oyster. And it's not a long, flat potato chip type oyster if you were to just let an oyster grow on its own without ever touching it.
Yeah. There's another gentleman that's part of your crew, Sean. Is it O'Brien?
Yeah, Sean O'Brien came when Richie smartened up and moved on.
Well,
I had
you're
to
still
find
connected.
somebody,
You still
I
got
had
the
to find
love of
somebody
oysters.
dumb enough to take over the mantle here. It's a lot of hard work. And Richie, Richie and I, when we started this, I don't know what it was, but there were 3 cold winters. There's one winter. You remember this one, Richie? Every harbor from the North Pole to North Carolina was frozen solid.
Wow.
That's how cold it was. We
Really?
had, yeah, really.
There's no water flowing. It's solid.
Every harbor was frozen.
Wow.
New York City was running ice cutters up to Albany to keep the Hudson River open. That's
wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
We couldn't get out. The ice was probably 8 inches thick on the Great South Bay.
Yeah, I remember being on the bow. And Chuck would motor out, and I'd be just breaking ice, breaking a path, and then we get to the farm and be out there doing what we had to do, securing our gear and stuff. And then we'd have a break a path coming back because it would freeze up right behind us.
Is that right? Wow.
Yeah.
The
water's always shifting. The ice is always shifting out there.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned Sean earlier, and you were talking about the environment, and I had this video that it was produced, and he's in it, and he discusses about the environment and how oysters play a role in it. So let's take a look at that.
So oysters basically clean the bay by filtering or filter feeders, and they filter out tons of little microns of animals and particles and phytoplankton. They're often used as a conservation effort for nitrogen extraction, and the oysters process the nitrogen in their own way. So what we showed you earlier were the bags that were on our trawl lines out in the water, out in our farm. We hoist them up onto the deck, and then they basically go through the tumbler sorter process, and it's basically sorting the oysters for us. Well, I guess it's important to keep the bay clean because it's from an ecological basis. It can serve everybody. It helps every living animal, including us, that uses water. Introducing things like oysters is really only going to promote other growth.
Yeah, that was great. And Chuck, you're the president of the Long Island Oyster Farmers, correct?
Yeah, Long Island Oyster Farmers.
So is that it says? Are you like on a board or something, or you're the president? But as far as like about the environment and looking out for the Great South Bay.
Well, that and other bays because it's a Long Island organization, so we're involved with Baconics, Mauritius, the Sound, So yeah, we advocate for things like
justice in the American way.
Yeah, truth, justice, in the American way.
I had to get that in there.
Making the world safe for democracy, one oyster at a time.
One oyster at a time. Look, you guys are not the only ones out there doing this, and I'm sure you guys have competition with your business, and that I guess that tends to be fisticuffs sometimes. With other. What's the technical term for you guys? Just oyster farmers, or what do you like? What's your given name?
Well, we generally refer to ourselves as oyster farmers.
Oyster farmers.
There's been a push to kind of label the industry as mariculture as opposed to aquaculture.
Okay.
The reason being because aquaculture is often an inland thing where they're growing catfish in Kansas or something like that. And a lot of that stuff is actually not as environmentally benign as what we do. Mariculture, oyster farming, for instance, is not only benign, it's beyond benign. It's actually restorative to the environment because it does a number of things. Oysters filter the algae, which is a direct result of the nitrogen that we spoke of earlier.
Right.
So that's a good thing. And an oyster farm creates a three-dimensional structure out there, which is missing because of, we also spoke about how when species collapse, so when eelgrass beds collapse, or the various things that used to be out there are no longer there.
Right.
Fishes don't have places to hide. They don't have places to spawn. They don't have, so they are now using this gear, barnacles attached to it, seaweeds attached to it. Other things come along and eat those things. And you actually create an environment that's conducive to a lot of diversity. Wow. And this has been measured and shown many, many times. And oyster farmers and oyster farms are doing a great environmental service. So it's not just benign, it's actually beyond that.
And also there are a lot of environmental groups establishing artificial oyster reefs, especially in like Jamaica Bay, the Hudson River, and those areas of water have come back tremendously and have brought back a lot of fish species. And
now there's a chat up there about the oysters having a rough, jagged shell and compared to the clam. Is that tie into what we were just talking about, or is that just how it's grown?
No, I think that's just the nature of the beast. I don't think that what it says, why do oysters have rough, jagged shells and clams have smooth shells? I don't know. It's how the good Lord made them.
Yeah, I tell you, Chuck, you came a long way from audio. You know everything about oysters. It's amazing. It's great. But getting back to competition, and I want to touch on as far as East Hampton, and you got wealthy people out there, and they're giving you guys you can you talk about the conflicts on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a worldwide phenomenon, but East Hampton is the epicenter of there's just so much wealth out there, and you don't have you're not even talking about oyster farms being next to millionaire homes. They're billionaires.
Yeah.
And if they don't want to look at you, if they don't want, if they decide they don't want you to be there, they're gonna get their way. Money has a way.
Right.
So there's been a fight. Several oyster farmers have been driven off their plots or their potential plots. They were just getting started, and they were basically chased away because of threat of lawsuits. And they said, and most oyster farmers are like, two brothers or a couple of cousins with a pickup truck and a 19-foot skiff. They cannot fight a billionaire.
Right. Exactly.
So they just retreat. Yeah. And there's one instance right now where there's a present oyster farm that's under a lot of attack from people who live on the shoreline and just feel that they have a right to own not only what they own, but what they can see. I can see it, so I own it.
You hear about buildings owning the airspace, above the building. It's like now you're owning the eyesight of what you're seeing. Come on.
Precisely.
Where does it stop? I mean,
Right, but with these billionaires, they have so much money to throw at this, even if frivolous. Right. They'll just chase people away because their pockets aren't deep enough.
It's not right.
Perpetually fight.
Definitely not right. Definitely not.
Well, George, you talked about the airspace in their suits, they actually have coined a phrase, and they're willing to use it. As absurd as it sounds, it's their viewscape.
Viewscape.
Their viewscape.
Wow.
Don't get in your way of their viewscape.
They're making up words now.
Yeah. Well,
that's incredible.
Anyway, so, and that's happened elsewhere in the country. One of the bigger stresses to make a oyster farm work is you have to realize that all along the East Coast and the West Coast, to a lesser extent, but still, there's just no cheap way to pull in. Generally, there's no cheap way to get your product out of the water and onto the land.
Yeah.
All the land is valuable. And an oyster farm, in the end, I got to bring a big, massive amount of oysters to the shoreline. Well, that means trucks. It means things that people don't want to see on the shoreline. They want their homes. So there's no place for a commercial operation,
right?
Or very little space for commercial operation, even a marina.
Yeah, yeah.
If I bring in my boat to a marina and it stinks to high heaven, and it does, who wants to put their 38-foot sailing skiff
$10
next
million
to
it? Exactly.
Yeah, and it's understandable.
I don't want to smell that damn thing. Get the hell out of here.
No, I don't blame them.
No.
But we don't. We have a hard time.
Yeah.
Just with that. So it gets really exasperating when people start using words like viewscape, because you're a quarter of a mile out in the water, and we're talking like distances that are a quarter of a mile. You can hardly make it out, much less.
There's some chats going on Facebook saying Brian Lee is very educational. Love it. Any further talks from Joe Pergolotti? Any further talks about potential reopening of the Gilgo Inlet? Do you know anything about that?
Wow, somebody's doing his homework there. Who was that?
That's Joe Pergolotti. He's also he owns a boat. He's out there. He's on the water. He fishes. Yeah. He's a friend of mine.
Well, that's one of my. There are a couple of big projects I'd like to do. I'd like to turn part of Captree Boat Basin, the state park there. If a lot of guys, if you people are out there, Long Islanders, and especially South Shore Long Islanders, where I'm talking about. Well, it's that place is a third not used any longer,
right?
And I'd like to turn that into a aquaculture center for oyster farming and other bay operations, so that we would have access to the land. And so that's one of my big projects. The other one, or that I'm purporting, it's not my project, but the other one would be a new inlet. I mean, there is a new inlet out by Bayport. I'm not saying Bayport, by Bellport. And it has done, it's amazing. The eastern end of the bay used to be the worst end of the bay in terms of, brown tides, lack of any kind of biodiversity.
Right.
And that inlet opened after Sandy. It changed the next day.
Wow.
That next summer, the difference was huge, and it has stayed huge and only gets bigger all the time.
Is that
and
right?
That's why this idiotic nonsense of stopping every
that's got to stop.
Overflow or inlet is counterproductive.
Yeah,
that's the biggest problem we have in the bay. So somebody asked about Gilgo. Gilgo has been talked about, and it's talked about because, interestingly, it's state land. So it's maybe not the best place to put an inlet. And when I say put an inlet, you realize anything that we do on the bay, be it Fire Island Inlet, Bellport Inlet, or New Inlet, or if we were to put one at Gilgo, is an engineered issue. It's not it'll have to be maintained. It'll have to have, it will be engineered.
Right.
It's one of the problems that I'm going to kind of jump around here a little bit. One of the problems I have with quote unquote the I don't know extreme environmentalists is they're actually often the most harmful thing to restoring the environment. The environmentalists themselves.
Is that right? Why is that?
Because they have this idea that nature is going to fix itself. That if you just let nature be, nature will fix itself. And that would be true if we got the, 7.5 million people who live on this island off. If you return it to nature, nature will restore itself. But we're not going to do that. So we have to come up with the next best issue. And the next best thing is we can see the harm that we've done, and we could look at, say, well, how can we mitigate that harm? How can we make it less harmful? As I said before, stop fertilizing your lawns.
Right.
That's how you mitigate it. Am I so absurd that I think you're going to abandon your homes and leave them? Because that would be the best. If all you people who are on this island just get off it, that would be the best. But that's not gonna happen.
Yeah,
that's not going to happen, Chuck.
It's not going to happen. So I realize that. So a lot of times environmentalists are the biggest problem because they won't accept a mitigated or engineered, if you will, solution that could really improve things. Will it make it, an environmental paradise as if, before the Europeans arrived here? No. But and that's, I guess, I've gotten off. Somebody asked about Gilgo.
No, and he was also mentioning about what does it say? Robert Moses closes it up to create an ocean parkway. Well, I mean,
Yes. Well, people don't realize. Well, people don't realize the lineage of this. We all think that, like you said, the '70s. Oh, it was great.
Yeah.
Well, you're remembering the '70s. You're not remembering the 1870s.
Yeah.
You just remember the 1970s. You have to realize.
I wonder if they had viewscapes back then, Chuck.
Nobody gave it here. There's no problem with viewscapes.
No problem with viewscapes.
But for you South Shore people, understand that before Robert Moses put that causeway in there was an inlet at Zack's Bay. There was an inlet at Gilgo. There was an inlet at Oak Beach. And there was an inlet, of course, at Fire Island Inlet. That's 4 inlets.
Right.
One.
Right.
And that wasn't, so what do you do about that? And one of the things we could possibly do is put some engineered solution at Gilgo. What that might look like, people would have to debate, but it would be an engineered solution.
Interesting.
Would it be kind of a natural inlet with a bridge over it? That's a possibility. Could it simply be culverts? Could it be big, giant, these moth culverts? You wouldn't even know it's there. It's just allowing water to flow underneath and come out. It could be.
Yeah, Joe is agreeing with you big time on that. Joe Pergolotti. Actually, he's a captain. I said he pilots a boat, but no, he's a captain. So yeah, he's agreeing with you big time about that whole thing, But I want to move on to.
Joe, I will say this in addition, but Joe is agreeing with me. He's a very smart man.
He is. No, Joe is smart. He's a smart guy. So
how modest of you, Chuck.
So when you go to market, now first of all, there's going to be some, bad oysters. How do you know they're bad? Is there size that you pick out? Is there, you got these fancy restaurants, so, they're going to want, the cream of the crop, some of them. Do you have you grade them? You sell them by grade? How does that all work?
Yeah, we sell them by size grade first off.
And Richie, are you spearheading this operation as far as when they come from the beds? and you put them in the tumbler?
Well, yeah, I'm very much part of that process, and getting the product through, getting it off the farm, getting it tended to. And, there are different times in the season where we're up against different things. When mussels are setting, or we have a particular kind of worm that may get into our stock.
So you find that out?
And that was always something we were fighting against, and, they need to be dealt with, and process it properly to get the best oyster out there as possible.
Yeah. And Chuck, what about like price? Do you set the price, or is it like I don't know, how does that all work?
Well, it's
the wholesale price.
There's a wholesale price, yeah. And it has a range, of course. There's no fixed price. Oh. And then there's a retail price, which when I say retail, or when a farmer says retail, he's talking about generally restaurants. That's our retail. Very few of us sell direct to the public, although out in the Peconics, there are a lot of little oyster stands where you can sell direct to public. I sell off my dock a little bit direct to the public, but it's a small portion of what I do. So, but the basic thing is wholesale and retail, meaning restaurant trade. That's the biggest part of the industry.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. They're graded by size first. Most of our oysters, meet a standard. And if they don't meet that standard, they basically don't make it to market. They sometimes we have doubles or really kind of strangely malformed oysters, and we'll give those. I'll take them home and eat them, and
oh, really?
Give them to other people with their kind of giveaways, that sort of thing, because they're really just an aesthetic issue. The meat and everything is fine.
There was an earlier chat that I missed about pearls. I mean, because you always hear oysters and pearls, and is that something that where the proximity of where the oyster is and how it could generate a pearl, or is it just I don't know?
Yeah. The pearls that most people think about are a pearl from a Pacific oyster. I don't even think it's grown for food source. But all oysters.
It's grown for jewelry?
Yeah, pearls for jewelry. So all oysters can make pearls. And in the 10 years that I've been out there, I found one pearl.
So a pearl, I don't know, you tell me, is it a deposit of mineral that the oyster generates into itself that creates the pearl?
It is,
it's actually an agitation. Actually, if foreign debris get inside the oyster shell, the oyster itself kind of calcifies around this intrusion, right, and it forms the pearl itself. And it's actually something that's agitating the oyster that causes the pearl to form.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
And in the Pacific, they specifically open the oysters and put, say, a fragment of shell or something in there to create the pearl.
Huh. Wow. That's news. I didn't know that, Richie.
Well, there's a whole lot of biology I learned from being out there.
Yeah, no, I mean, and Chuck, my God, the guy, he could take you to school with this stuff. It's incredible.
Yeah, like Richie said, a pearl is actually something that's gotten into the oyster, and the oyster has no way of expelling it. Okay, so it literally starts to form calcium around it and make it a smooth, benign thing.
Well, it's not really technically a pearl. It's only a pearl when it's harvested out of it or taken out of the oyster, right? Then it's called a pearl. When it's in the oyster and it's agitating or whatever, however you're describing it, is it still called a pearl?
Yeah, sure. imagine a piece of grit or sand got into the inner workings of an oyster.
Right.
Well, that would tend to cut its tissue. It would, it's a problem. So the oyster has found, and other shellfish, clams can have pearls for that matter.
Wow.
They will form calcium around this thing so that it becomes smooth and benign and is no longer aggravating their tissues. They can't expel it, so they just incorporate it in the calcium, which is what the shell is. So when you discover this yourself, when you open up an oyster and you go, oh, look, a pearl, that's the mechanism you're seeing. But the pearl was always in there. And the pearls that you generally see in our oysters, which is extremely rare, I've only seen one, just aren't very attractive. They're just, they're not like you wouldn't make jewelry out of them.
No, but I mean, the oysters, that you yield, they look like beautiful oysters. They're good size, and when it's at the plate and you and you serve it, it's looking like this, and it's beautiful. It's gorgeous, wow. I tell you, I've been meaning to get out there, Chuck, and visit the place and seeing what you have out there. I'm dying to taste one of your oysters. Maybe I'll get out there sooner than you think.
That'd be fine. You come on out. If you want an oyster, I got a million of them. So. Yeah,
no, I know you do. But guys, it was great, man. It's great having you on tonight. I learned a lot, and I'm sure that a lot of the viewers learned too. It's not a subject that is talked about. I don't think. When I was thinking, as far as going, not science, but kind of touching on science and getting a guest on, I was thinking of you guys and because you got a story, Chuck, and where you came from and where you are right now, and you're driving the business, and Richie, you're early on you spent time, and now you're still in the business in audio, and you're still doing your thing. But it's just an interesting topic, and everybody likes oysters. It's out there, and it's tasty and all that stuff. And I'll tell you, it was really great having you guys on. Learned a lot. Well,
thanks for having us, George. And if I could say this, the whole adventure of it was real attractive to me, and it was a lot of hard work and a lot of learning, and it was truly an adventure for the 6 or 7 years I was with Chuck, and really hitting it and building this thing. And it was a experience in my life that I'm glad I had a chance to enjoy. And thanks, Chuck, for taking me on.
Yeah. He loves you. Come on.
No, we were in the trenches with audio for a long time, so he knows I had a high pain threshold.
Yeah.
So George, I'll sign off with these, couple of things. One thing really that I just want to get off my chest, because it's been bothering me.
This is the air of grievances. We could do this. I don't do the things of strength.
I'm just saying, back in the day, George.
Right.
Back in the day, there were a lot of video guys who would return their headsets to me. I didn't have to go collect them. You were never one of those guys.
There you have it. Hey, look, there's always one fly in the ointment, as they say, But well, come on, that was a long time ago. I only did it maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 times. I just wanted you to come back and pick it up so we could chat.
Oh, who knew?
Who knew? Guys, it was fun tonight. Thanks, fellas. Thanks for coming on.
Okay.
Thanks again, George.
All right, you got it. Oh my God. They're hysterical. And what a business Chuck has. I mean, he does it right out there in the Great South Bay, and I wish him a lot of luck with his business. And go get him, man. I mean, sell your oysters and don't worry about the viewscapes and don't worry about that stuff.
Fix the environment.
Yeah, exactly. So Thursday, we're going to have a director of photographer on, another Chuck Fishbein. And he has what a great story he has. I mean, he was a photographer for, I believe, Newsday, and he shot sports. He was a still photographer. Then he got into video, and he creates beautiful pictures. And so he's going to be on Thursday night. So tune back in on Buzz Talk Live. You can find me on all the social media out there. Shameless plug. And follow my channel for the next show at 9 p.m. on Thursday night. Good night, America.